Hey Blender Maniacs, have I got an awesome tutorial for you today. In this one, we are going to be creating this awesome racetrack all procedurally with geometry nodes. Check it out. And the best part is, we could go ahead and we could draw our track however we want, and it automatically creates it and adds the cars, the barriers, the grass, etc. How awesome is that? And we're going to be able to change how many cars there are, the car speed, etc., and everything that we want. Again, it's just so satisfying to be able to just draw the track and just have it automatically created. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at how to make this. By the way, I'm in the process of creating a brand new course all on geometry nodes. It's going to go over every single geometry node, and we are going to create some awesome projects with geometry nodes. So if you're interested in that, look out for it. It will be out shortly, and let's get right into this tutorial. So I'm going to create a new scene right here, new, and let's go ahead and delete this default cube and go to geometry nodes and hit Shift A. We're going to get a curve, Bezier curve. I'm going to hit the T key to close that and also remove the spreadsheet. Then I'm going to click on new to add a new geometry nodes, and let's get started. Now, once again, I'm not going to go over every single node and explain it in depth, as in the course we're going to cover all of that and go in depth in every single node, and that would just take way too long here in this tutorial, so I'll try to cover it as much as possible. So let's get right to it. First thing I want to do is I want to convert this curve to a mesh. So we're going to hit Shift A, get a curve to mesh right here, and drop it in. So now it's converted this curve into a mesh. Then here we have a profile curve, so we're able to add a profile to this. For this, obviously, I want a road, so I want a flat profile. I'm going to left click and drag out of here and get a curve line right here. And now you can see what that gives us. However, the settings on here are not the right settings. We have it going on the Z. So let's put the Z to 0, and we'll put the X right here to 1. And the X right here on the end to -1. So now we got that right there. Also, with our curve, let's select in edit mode, hit SY0 to straighten it out. And we could also bring it out a little bit. All right, very cool. So now we got that, which is a start of a road. Next thing we want is, you can see that over here, if I hit T to bring up the tools, you can see that here we have a draw curve right here. And this is the magic. Well, everything's the magic, but this is really cool. Here, what this allows for us to do is if I delete these segments, X delete segments, I'm able to just draw a curve like so. But you can see that the start and the end do not connect. So we want a way for these to connect up. And we're going to hit Shift A and search for a set spline cyclic right here. And what this is going to do is it's going to set our spline cyclic, or connect the start and the end. So let's go ahead and we're going to drop this right here before the curve to mesh. And we're going to enable cyclic right here so that the cyclic is true. So now you can see that when we draw this, it will connect the start and the end. Very cool. Now to get the best results, I don't recommend going really close like that, otherwise it will overlap. So I recommend drawing 3/4 of your curve and then letting it go. Sweet! That is pretty cool and very satisfying. Next, we want to go ahead and extrude this because right now it is completely flat. I'm going to go back to my select option and object mode. So we're going to hit Shift A, get an extrude mesh, and let's drop this after the curve to mesh right here. Now right here it's extruding the individual faces, so let's deselect individual, and let's bring the offset scale to a negative so that it's going up like so. Very cool. Now you can see that over here, it's a little bit cutting into the segments, so we could change that later on. But for now, I'm just going to select this segment and dissolve those vertices to remove it. We'll change the settings for the draw curve in a second. All right, so now we have it extruded. Very, very cool. Next, let's go ahead and add in the car, or the point where the car will be. So we're going to hit Shift A. We're going to get a sample curve right here. And what this will do is it will give us a sample or a point on the curve where we can move it from the start of the curve to the end of the curve. So let's go ahead and plug in the set spline cyclic right here. And we're going to plug this into the curve right there. Then we're going to go ahead and get a set position node. So set position. And what this allows for us to do is it allows for us to set the position of this point on our curve. So for this, once again, I'm going to drag out from the set spline cyclic and drop it into the set position right here. And if I control shift left click this to see what it gives us, you can see what's happening. So here we're able to set the offset or the position of this curve. But what we're going to do is we're going to set this sample curve or this point right here onto the position of this curve here. So we're going to drag this position into the position right there. And now you can see what's happening, which is not exactly what we want. But here you can see that as we move this factor, it's moving this point or this sample along the position of our original curve right here. So you can see what's happening. Now, obviously, we got some kind of bow tie right here, which is not what we want. So over here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get an instance on points. So Shift A, instance on points right here. By the way, get the instance on points, not 2 points, and drop it after the set position. So right now what it's doing is it's basically adding the curve as that point, and that's why it's all jumbled up. But instead of that curve, we want to go ahead and add in an object for that point. So here in the instance, for now, let's go ahead and just drag in a cube. So I'm going to get a cube mesh, and you can see that now we have this cube here, and when we move the factor here, it's following along our curve. How awesome is that? Pretty cool. Now, one issue we have is that our original raceway is gone. So over here, let me go ahead and plug that into there. We need to get a join geometry. As the name implies, join geometry will join your geometry. Let's plug it there, Control Shift left click it. And we need to get our original geometry, which is this one right here, the extrude mesh for our path right here. And we need to connect this as well into the join geometry. So now if we Control Shift left click our join geometry, we have our circuit or our path or raceway. And we have this right here where there's the cube going along here, or the car. Very cool. We'll change this cube to the car in just a second. All right, now for animating this cube or the car, I'm just going to call it the car for now. We obviously need to change this factor right here. Now, two things is that right now there are a bunch of cubes all piled on top of each other, and we can't see it because they're all in the same position because of this set position. But if from the factor right here, we drag out a random value right here to give a random value to this factor, you can see that we have several different points or cars right here. So without it, they're all on the same factor and all on top of each other. But with a random value, which basically gives a random value between 0 and 1 in this case, it's going to distribute these at different points along the curve. Now with this, I want to go ahead and be able to animate this. So if we hit play right now, you can see that it's not doing anything. For that, we need to go ahead and hit Shift A, add a scene time node. And this basically gives us the seconds or the frames outputs as floats or values right here. So for example, if you're on frame 30, it will output a value of 30. If you're on second 1, it will output a value of 1, second 2, a value of 2, etc. So we could use this to change this value here. You can see if I plug the seconds into the factor and play it, it will play around like that based on the seconds of the timeline. Pretty cool. But I want to go ahead and combine both of these. So I'm going to hit Shift A, add a math node, drop this in, and put the random value into here. And now if I shift left arrow to go back to the beginning, you can see that we got that. However, it's not looping. So to have it loop, we're going to select this math node, Shift D, and change it from an add to a fraction and drop that after there. So now if we play it, you can see it loops around nicely. Very, very cool. Now I want to be able to control the speed of this. So I'm going to hit Shift A, get another math node right here, and we're going to change this to divide and drop this after the scene time. And now with this divide, if we increase it, we can make it go slower or faster, as you can see right there. Nice. And now some of these cubes are a little bit too close to each other, so I want to be able to separate these a little bit. I'm going to hit Shift A, once again get a math node, change this to multiply, and drop this after the random value. So with this, it's going to multiply the random value and increase it. So if we increase the random value, it's going to get a different point or position the point differently on the curve and more separated from the previous one. So you can see here that we could kind of give a little bit more spacing between the cars, as you could see right there. Very cool. All right, so we got something going there. We got a bunch of cubes spinning around, which is very oddly satisfying. Let me move this right there. I mean, honestly, with just this, we're able to create a raceway or a racetrack, and we would be good. We would just replace the cube right here with a car object, and it would look good. However, we're going to take it a little bit further. I want a way to be able to choose how many points or cars we have. For that, with the set spline cyclic, the one that is going into the set position, it's basically taking all of these points or handles of the curve and plugging it into here, and all of those curves or handles are going to be cubes or cars. But let's say we want to change that. Well, we could hit Shift A, get a resample curve right here, and this will resample the curve or add more or less points on the curve depending on the number right here. So we could drop that in between here. Again, drop it in the one that's going into the set position. And now you can see we could control the amount of cars or points or handles of the curve based on this count right here. So we could have 1 car, 2, 3, etc., etc. Very cool. Now, obviously, you don't want too many, otherwise they're going to start to, intersect into one another. Unless you make your raceway way bigger, then that will be fine. But for now, I'm just going to put this to 3, which is nice. Next, I want to add in some grass in the middle right here of our curve, and we got a great way to do that. If we hit Shift A, we could get a fill curve node right here, and let's put it there. And we're going to take our set spline cyclic and drop that into the fill curve, and let's drop the mesh into the join geometry right here. And you can see what that does. As the name implies, it will basically fill your curve. Let's also change it to n-gon, and that's basically the way that it's going to fill the curve, either with triangles or just an n-gon, which is a little bit cleaner. All right, we are almost done. I'm going to pause this, and in the drop down here, I'm going to turn on wireframe geometry so that I can see the wireframe. And now what we're going to want to do is 2 things. We're going to create the geometry where we could add the material for the lines on the middle and the outskirts, and also for us to be able to put the barriers around there. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I first want the line in the middle right here. So I'm going to go ahead and in the curve line, I'm going to make the middle part or the whole road very small. So I'm going to probably put it to like 0.1 right there, and this one to -0.1 right there, so that we just have this single line or strip in the middle. Then after the extrude mesh, I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift D and drop another extrude mesh after it. Now for this, it's really cool. We're able to basically have a selection to select what's going to be extruded. And I want just the sides of the previous extruded mesh to be extruded again. So I'm going to select the side and drop that in the selection. And now if I decrease this, you can see that it's extruding just the sides. And now if you look at the wireframe, we have a line in the middle, and now we have these sides. Now I want some lines on the side as well. So once again, I'm going to get this extrude mesh, Shift D to duplicate it. And this time we're going to get the top and plug that into the selection. And you can see here that when I decrease this, we're able to get the sides right there. Now again, I go over every single geometry node and every single option in the new Geometry Nodes course that's coming out. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. Also, if you're interested in shader or compositing nodes, I already have a course that covers every single one of those. All right, so now that we got that, let's go ahead and add a material for these quickly. So here, I'm gonna go to the Material tab. Let's click New. We'll name this first one Road. Where we're going, we don't need roads. Let's add a new one, and here we'll name it White Lines. Then we're gonna hit Shift A. To add materials to geometry nodes, you need to hit Shift A, get a set material. Let's drop this one right here. We're gonna select our road material right here, and then Shift D, duplicate it, and here we're going to get our White Lines material. Now let's go ahead and customize these quickly. I'm going to go to rendered viewport shading mode right here. Now right here on the white lines material, let's quickly remove this so that we can focus on just the road. I'm going to Alt left click and bring this out. And then here, make sure to click on the road material. Let's go to the shader editor. And here we're going to create a simple material for our road. Shift A, add a noise texture. With Node Wrangler enabled, Control T, mapping texture coordinate, change it to object, and plug the factor into the base color. So now we got that right there, which looks terrible. So let's go ahead and tweak this. From the normal, I'm going to drag out and get a bump node right here. And then I want to go ahead and first contrast this a little bit. So I'm going to hit Shift A, get a color ramp, and drop that after the noise texture. And then here we could bring up the black slider and bring down the white one to contrast it a little bit. Let's also increase the scale to like 20 and put the detail to 15. Then I'm going to go ahead and put the color into the height right here to give it some bump. And there we go. No, I'm just kidding. It's way too much. So let's put the distance to like 0.1 or maybe even 0.01. Actually, let me go with 0.08 right there. And I'm going to bring the roughness up to 1 right there. Then I want to give this road a different color. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Shift A, add a color ramp, drop this after the other color ramp, and this one will basically dictate the color of our road. All right, and then for the second color on the color ramp, the white right here, I'm just going to bring this down to a more grayish, kind of a dark gray color. All right, lastly, I want to go ahead and add in some cracks to the road here. So I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to get a Voronoi texture right here. And let's plug the vector into the vector of the Voronoi. Then let's Control Shift left click it to see what we got. We're going to change this from F1 to distance to edge because right now it looks like leopard spots or something. And then here I want to distort this because it looks a little bit too clean. So I'm going to hit Shift A, get a mix node. Let's change this from float to color and drop this in right here before the Voronoi. Now once again, if you want to learn all about shader nodes and compositing nodes, check out my course that goes over every single node and all of their options. But here I'm going to hit Shift A, get a noise texture, and on this one I'm going to plug the vector into the noise here and the color into slot B right there. So now we have basically our original vectors here and this vector being distorted by the noise texture here. So if we go to 0, we have our original vectors, 1, it being distorted. So I'm going to go ahead and set this from mix to linear light. And I'm going to bring this not so high. I'm going to bring it to something like that right there. So like a 0.1. Now I don't want the cracks to be everywhere on the road. Otherwise this is going to be a bumpy ride. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift A, get a Musgrave texture right here. And I'm going to plug once again the vector right here into the Musgrave. And let's Control Shift left click this. And I'm going to put the scale to like 1. And now what I want is I want this cracking effect to only be on the parts that are white. So the parts that are black, it will just be the clean road. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and hit Shift A, get another mix node right here, change it to color, and plug the Voronoi into A, and plug the Musgrave right here into B, and Control Shift left click this. And then I'm going to go ahead and change this from mix to multiply, and I'm going to put the factor to 1. So now the parts that are black on the Musgrave are going to have no cracks, and the parts that are white are going to have cracks. Then I just want to add this as a bump, so I'm going to go ahead, let's Control Shift left click the principled BSDF, select the bump, Shift D, duplicate it, drop it after, and plug this multiply into the height right there. Lastly, let's go ahead and increase this. So I'm going to put the distance to 1 right there. So now you can see that we have these cracks right here. Now it's a little bit too much, so I'm actually going to put this first distance to 0.02 right there, and put this one to 0.1 maybe right there, or maybe a 0.5 or so. Very cool. Now let me turn off the wireframe overlays, and now you can see what we got. Now you could change where the cracks are by changing the size right here, so you could have bigger or smaller patches of cracks. I'm just going to put it to something like that which looks like that. So wherever there's white, the road will be cracked. So there you go. Feel free to play around with the settings there as you want. All right, next let's go back to our geometry node editor over here, and let's drop in this white lines set material after the road. Now you can see that's taking over everything. So I want to go ahead and plug in the top from our original extrude mesh into the selection so that we have the white line in the middle. And I also want the side right here in the selection as well so that we have the sides white. So here I'm going to hit Shift A, get a Boolean math node, and I'm going to drop the side into here and the top from the first extrude mesh into here. I'm going to change this from and to or and plug this into the selection so that we have the lines in the middle and on the sides. Next, let's go ahead and add the grass over here. So I'm going to click new and name it grass. Now again, this is going to be very simple because I don't want to get too much into it. Otherwise, this video will be very, very long. But here I'm going to hit Shift A, add a set material, and we need to drop this in the one that's after the fill curve. So after the fill curve, drop that in there and select grass. For this material, let's go to the shader editor quickly. And again, I'm going to make this very simple, just a noise texture. Feel free to expand on this. Control T, mapping texture coordinate, object, Shift A, add a color ramp, and plug the factor into the factor, color into the color, and then just choose two different green colors. So I'm going to choose a darkish green like so. Control C to copy, go over here, Control V, and then just scroll my mouse wheel up to make it a lighter color right there. I'm also going to put the roughness to 1 so that it's not shiny, and put the scale to 10 and the detail to 15 right there. And once again, feel free to expand on the material. Let's go to our light quickly, change it to a sun lamp with a value of 4, and hit R twice to rotate it how we want. Very cool. Now here, the line in the middle is a little bit too big, so back in the geometry nodes, we could change the size of that line by changing the start and the end on the curved line. I'm going to put it from 0.1 to 0.05 right there, and change this one to -0.05 right there, so that's a little bit skinnier. Once again, feel free to adjust it how you want. All right, now for making the car, I'm going to go ahead and time-lapse this, as this is pretty simple. I'm going to make a low poly-ish car. Let's hit Shift A, add a cube. I'm going to move it over to the side. And in top view, I'm going to go ahead and hit Tab to go into edit mode, Control R, add a loop cut right here. And I'm going to go ahead and delete half the cube. And here I'm going to add a mirror modifier, and I'm going to go ahead and model the car. Again, I'm going to give it a low poly look because this is going to be kind of a, well, I guess it's in between. This is like one of those toy racetracks that you get as a kid where you have the little, the little gun in your hand and you press it and it goes around the racetrack. But also it's a mixture since we made a semi-realistic material for the road. So with that, go ahead and model any kind of car you want or just import a model. All right, and there we go. We have our little car. Well, it's not so little. It's bigger than the track. But with that, make sure to hit Control A, apply the scale. And let's go over here to our track. Here in the object, we are going to change our cube. So let's remove our cube. And what we could do is we could look at what the name of this is, which is cube. Just go ahead and left click and drag cube into the geometry nodes and check that out. We could just drag in objects, which is awesome. Let's plug the geometry into the instance right there. And now we have some cars, which is really cool. Now, obviously, they are way too big. So here on the scale, let's left click and drag down, hold down shift, and let's put the scale way down. So something like that. Also, they're in the floor, so we could change that multiple ways. We could change it in edit mode. However, I'm just going to go ahead and add a transform node after the object info. and I'm going to bring up the Z translation right here. Now you'll see one issue right away, and that is that the cars are not following the rotation of the track. As you can see, unless that's what you want, there you go. So to change this and for them to follow along with the track, we need to go ahead and change the rotation over here. So the rotation right here, we want it to be intuitive and change the rotation as it changes on the curve. So for that, we could go ahead and drag out from the rotation an align Euler to vector. And again, you could think of an Euler just as a rotation. So it's going to align the rotation to the vector. Now here with this node, the sample curve, now here you can see that on the sample curve we have the tangent, and the tangent is basically the direction that the handles of the curve are going in. So we're going to take the tangent and place that into the vector right here. So now you can see that we have something that's happening. Now at least the rotation is kind of proper. However, our car is rotated the wrong way. Now there's a couple ways we could fix this. If you go over here to the X, you could control shift and hover your mouse over the pivot and scroll your mouse wheel down and change that. Or you could try changing the axis right here and changing it here as well. And you can see that right here, Y auto works great right here, and you can see that we got that. However, obviously the cars are backwards. And again, depending on the rotation of your scene and your car, you might have a different pivot right here. So go ahead and check which one works for you. And now if we still had X and auto right here, this can work as well. We just need to go to our transform right here and change the rotation on the Z. So here, if we change the rotation on the Z right here, you can see that now we have it proper. And now if we play, you can see that the cars are going around the track. How awesome is that? That is so cool. So again, depending on your scene, you might have to set it to a different axis and a different pivot. And you could also change the rotation here. So there's several different ways to kind of tweak the rotation of the car. All right, very cool. All right, let's go ahead and give these cars different colors and then add the barriers around, and we will be done. So I'm going to select the car, the main color of the car, and here in the shader editor, we're going to go ahead and add an object info. So Shift A, get an object info right here. We're going to get a color ramp. So color ramp right there. And we're going to plug in random into the color ramp and then the color into the base color right here. So now it will give them a random color. Let's also change this from linear to constant. And then right here, just go ahead and pick whatever colors you want. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a yellow, maybe leave a black right there. Control left click to add another color stop. Pick a red color right here. And again, depending on where these color stops are on the color ramp, it will give more or less of that color to those cars. So you can see if I start to bring the yellow down, let me bring it down further. You can see that here, some of the black cars will start to turn yellow. So again, play around with it and see, if you want more cars to have a particular color, etc. Just play around with the positioning on the color ramp and the colors. And of course, you could add more cars. All right, so that's the colors of the car. Let's go back to the geometry nodes and let's add those barriers around here. So for that, I'm first going to quickly model it. This is going to be, once again, very simple. Let's add a cube, and right here, let's move our cube over. I'm going to hit tab to go into edit mode. SY, scale it down. SX, scale it down. Select this face, and let's hit G, Z, bring it up. Control R, add a loop cut up here, and select this face, E key, extrude, and then just add a loop cut right here, and then select this face, E key, extrude down. And that's literally how simple we are going to keep it. All right, very cool. Also with this, let's right click, set origin, origin to geometry, right there to put it in the center, and then hit tab to go into edit mode, A to select everything, G, Z, and bring it up so that the origin is at the bottom of this barrier, but in the middle. All right, then let's go back here. We're going to go ahead and we are going to go to our extrude nodes. And you can see that our last extrude mesh node right here, let's Control Shift left click it. And let's turn on wire as well, or wireframe. We want basically these faces right here on the edge, and we want to add the barriers along those. So for that, we're going to go ahead and get a mesh to points, and this will add points to our mesh. So let's get a mesh to points right here, and let's plug this last extrude mesh into there and Control-Shift left click it. So now you can see that it adds points to it, but again, I only want points along the edge right here and not right there. So for that, we're going to go ahead and we are going to get the selection right here. You can see if I plug the side into the selection of the mesh to points, we get that there. And we only have the points on this extruded part of the mesh, which are these here. But I want to expand on that because again, we have points that are underneath and on the inside too. I only want the points that are facing on the Z normal. So I'm going to hit Shift A, get a Boolean math node right here, and I'm going to go ahead and plug this selection into the bottom there. And out of this one, I'm going to get a compare right here. And we're going to change this to vector, and we are going to put it to not equal. So not equal right there. Then we are going to drag out from A, we're going to drag out a normal right here. And then we're going to put 1 on the Z. Again, this is X, Y, Z, so let's put 1 on the Z. So now if we plug just this into the selection, you can see what happens right here. It's basically going to take this not equal, and it's going to add points only to the parts that are not equal to the normal of the Z axis. We could also increase this epsilon here to change that, and you can see that right there. And this is basically going to be the threshold for what it considers to be the Z normal. All right, let me hit Control Z to undo that and just leave it to there. So I'm going to plug this one into the Boolean right here and plug the Boolean into the selection right there. So now you can see what we got. And now let's increase this epsilon right here so that we only have points right there. So we only want these single points right there. So again, increase the epsilon to however much you need to just have points right there. And also keep an eye out because sometimes there will be a stray point there. So make sure to increase the epsilon enough, just like that. So now we have points just along the edges there. Awesome. We're going to hit Shift A, get an instance on points. So instance on points, drop that after the mesh to points. And for this, we want to get our barrier object. So let's get cube001, drop that in there, and we're going to plug this geometry into the instance right there. Obviously, it's way too big, so left click and drag down on the scale and bring it down and check that out. Now, just like before, you can see one issue is that the barriers are not following along with the road. So we need to once again, out of the rotation right here, drag out a align Euler to vector right here. And we need to get the curve tangent information. So basically the information of how the curve is turning or the direction of the handles. Now right here, instead of getting the tangent from the sample curve right here, instead of plugging this into the vector like we did before, you can see that here we don't really get any good results with this. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and capture the curve tangent attribute before everything else. So we're going to go over here and we're going to go to our original group input and we're going to hit Shift A, get a capture attribute. Now this is really cool. It's going to capture an attribute, and in this case, it's going to capture the curve tangent. So here we're going to go ahead and change this to vector because we want to capture the vector, and we're going to leave this to point. Then out of the value, we're going to drag out and we're going to search for a curve tangent. So curve tangent right here, and there we go. So now basically this node is capturing the vector, point, curve tangent, and it's outputting that value or that information out of this attribute socket here. So let's plug this into our vector on the align Euler to vector, and you can see that we start to get something. Let's go ahead and go to X and leave it to auto, and you can see that that works nicely. Now, once again, feel free to change these depending again on your scene and your setup. You might have to do a different pivot and axis. But for here, X and auto works fine. All right, very cool. Last final touch here. I don't like how many barriers there are. So out of the selection, I'm going to get a random value. And it's basically going to get a probability here where the probability at 0 means there are no fences for the selection, and probability of 1 means that every point is going to have a fence. So here, if we bring this down, some points will have fences and some will not. So I'm just going to give this kind of like a random value here, something like that. Next, let's plug this instance on points into the join geometry and Control-Shift left-click that. Very cool. Now you can see one issue over here with our fences. You can see that some of them are not really conforming to the curve properly. And that's because our curve only has so many handles. If we go ahead and turn off the geometry nodes, you can see that here we only have so many handles. And the tangent of the curve or of the handles is once again the direction of these handles. So for example, right here, if I get my handy dandy annotate, you can see that right here. The curve tangents are basically going to be the direction that the curve control points are going in, or the tangent of it. So those are the curve tangents. Now obviously, if we only have so many handles, you can see that here this fence piece is going to be rotated here, but then the ones in between don't really have a rotation orientation because it's going to have to interpolate between these two curve tangents right here. So to fix that, we're going to go over here, and after our group input, we're going to go ahead and hit Shift A, get a resample curve right here, and drop that in. This is basically going to go ahead and add some curve handles. Let me go ahead and remove this and re-enable our geometry nodes. You can see that here it's going to resample our curve and add more or less points or handles. So here, if we increase the count, you can start to see that whereas before, if I go ahead and remove this, Alt left click and remove it, you can see that these ones are not turning around properly because again, there's only so many curved tangents to go along with and get the information of the rotation from. But if we increase this and increase the count, you can see that it's going to increase the amount of curve handles in here, which means that we're going to have more tangents for the curves because there's more handles. And now you can see that the fence pieces all have, for example, their own curve handle or curve tangent to work with, and it doesn't have to interpolate between two that are spaced out very, very far. So put this to a nice high number. We could even just put 100 if we want, and there we go. So cool. Look at that. That is freaking awesome. Very last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and first put the scale of these cars down a little bit. Well, maybe not like that, something like there. Again, feel free to tweak it. Let's just quickly add a material to this. So shader editor over here, I'm going to click on new, and here I'm going to go ahead and just name it barrier. And here for this, again, pretty simple. I'm going to hit Shift A, add a separate XYZ, Control T, remove that image texture that's in there for some reason. Change this to object. Let's Control Shift left click this. I'm then going to add a math node right here. Change it to ping pong. And so it's going to basically ping pong between 0 and whatever value we put here. Let's put this to 1. So now it's ping ponging between 0 and 1, 0 and 1, etc. Then we're going to hit Shift D, add another one before here, and change this one to multiply so that we could increase the amount of times it ping pongs between 0 and 1. And then lastly, a color ramp. Color ramp right here. Let's drop this principled BSDF after. And I'm going to change this black right here to a red color. Change it to whatever you want. Change this to constant and bring this white slider down so that now we have that. Again, feel free to play around with these values and the colors as you wish. All right, super cool. Check it out. We now have a geometry node racetrack right here. How awesome is that? Now, of course, feel free to play around with the settings, mess around with it, make it your own. If you want to redraw your track, just go into edit mode, X, delete the segments. Make sure you're on the draw mode for the curve, and then just go ahead and draw whatever kind of speedway you want, and boom, there we go, we have a track. And look at that, how cool is that? That is so awesome and satisfying to be able to just draw a track just like so. Very, very cool. All right, also one last thing, if you want to have multiple tracks, make sure that on your geometry nodes over here that you enable all curves in the resample curve. Enable all curves so that it's on multiple curves. Of course, then you might need to adjust the time and the speed, etc. So with that, make sure to share your work on BlenderMania3.com. Look out for the new Geometry Nodes course, which is going to come out. It's going to go over every single geometry node, and we're going to create some really, really awesome things. So with that, create your own project with this, expand on it, make it your own, and then share it on BlenderMania3.com. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now. Au revoir.